You've been lied to about addiction your entire life. They told you it's a disease, a weakness, a failure of willpower. They gave you charts about dopamine and lectures about discipline. But Carl Jung saw through this comfortable deception and discovered something that should terrify every person living unconsciously. Addiction is not a disease. It's a spiritual crisis screaming through your body. You think the man stumbling into his 5th bar this week is weak. You think the woman refreshing her phone for the 100th time today lacks self-control. You're looking at symptoms and calling them causes. You're staring at smoke and pretending there's no fire. Jung knew better. He saw that behind every addiction lies a soul crying out for something it cannot name, something sacred that went missing. This isn't about substances. This isn't about bad habits or childhood trauma, though those play their parts. This is about the abyss inside you, the one you've tried to silence with work, with relationships, with endless distractions. The one that's been speaking through your compulsions all along, begging you to listen. From the outside, addiction looks like moral failure. Just stop drinking, put down the phone, have some self-respect. But Jung understood what these surface-level observers never will. The addict is not someone too weak to heal. They are someone too wounded to keep pretending. They are not afraid of pain, they are afraid of meaningless pain. So they drink, they scroll, they gamble, they consume, not because it solves anything, but because for one sacred moment, it makes the unbearable feel manageable. You want to judge them? Look closer. Behind every addiction is not a weak-willed person, but a human being trying to survive in a world that has never truly seen them. Jung revealed that addiction is not a deviation from the human condition. It is the human condition exposed. It's what happens when the outer world becomes unbearable and the inner world falls silent. Here's what no addiction specialist will tell you. People don't become addicts because they want to ruin their lives. They become addicts because somewhere along the way, they learn that their pain doesn't matter, that it should be hidden, medicated into non-existence, or transformed into productivity. Addiction is the body's attempt to feel whole when wholeness has been forbidden. It's the mind trying to escape chaos when chaos is all society offers. And it's the soul, Jung would insist, crying out to be reunited with itself. Until you understand that addiction is the message, not the enemy, you'll keep attacking symptoms while the real cause remains untouched, growing stronger in the darkness of your denial. Nobody is addicted to alcohol. Nobody is addicted to cocaine, porn, nicotine, or social media. This is the brutal truth that will shatter every comfortable assumption you've made about addiction. People are addicted to relief, to silence, to numbness, to the temporary illusion that the hunger is finally gone. The substance is never the destination. It's the counterfeit map to a sacred place they've forgotten how to find. Jung saw what others missed. The addict isn't trying to escape life. The addict is trying to escape a life without soul. The substance masquerades as medicine, offering what appears to be healing but delivering only deeper wounds. Because what the addict truly craves cannot be found in any external source. They are starving for meaning, for connection, for the divine spark that our soulless culture has systematically extinguished. When someone becomes addicted, what they're really saying is this: I've attached myself to something not because I love it, but because I'm terrified of what life looks like without it. The addiction is rarely about the object itself. It's about the state of being it provides. And that state, even when toxic, feels safer than the emotional chaos waiting underneath. You want to understand addiction? Look deeper than the behavior. The gambler isn't chasing money, they're chasing the moment when time stops and nothing else matters. The drinker isn't seeking intoxication, they're seeking silence from the relentless noise of self-judgment. The person lost in their phone isn't craving content, they're desperately trying to escape the unbearable weight of their own thoughts. Jung was crystal clear. People do not become addicted because they are broken. They become addicted because they are disconnected from meaning. The substance becomes a surrogate for connection, for depth, for the inner alignment that a spiritually bankrupt world never taught them to find. When that substance fades, so does the illusion of safety, leaving them more empty than before. The tragedy is that most addicts never realize what they're truly searching for. They don't understand that the reason they can't stop isn't weakness. It's because what they're trying to fill is bottomless. You cannot fill a spiritual void with material substitutes. You can try, and millions do, but it never lasts. The hunger returns, stronger and more demanding each time. Until that person encounters something more powerful than their craving, something that feels more real than their pain, they will keep reaching for the same empty solution. They'll keep wondering why it never truly works, never recognizing that they're searching for God in all the wrong places. The bottle feels like salvation because genuine salvation has been made unavailable to them. This is not about moral failure. This is about a failed spiritual quest. You are not drawn to destruction because you are evil. You are drawn to destruction because you are split in two. There's the part of you that performs, copes, and pretends everything is fine. And there's the part that knows this performance is killing your soul. Addiction begins the moment you betray that deeper knowing, and it will not end until you return to it. You think addiction is about what you consume, but Jung knew better. Addiction is about what consumes you, and what consumes you is the part of yourself you've been trying to kill. He called it the shadow, and until you understand its language, you'll keep mistaking its screams for weakness when they're actually cries for integration. The shadow is not some monster lurking in your depths. It's simply the truth you've been unwilling to face. It's the pain you were told was unacceptable, the desires you were shamed for, the memories you buried to survive in a world that demanded you be less than whole. Over time, these repressed parts of yourself begin to rot in the basement of your psyche. And when they can no longer be ignored, they rise, not with words, but with behaviors you can't explain. This is why addicts often feel possessed, because part of them is acting without their permission. You try to be strong, perfect, polite, and you repress the anger, the grief, the shame. But what you repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It festers in the dark corners of your unconscious until it explodes into compulsions that seem to come from nowhere. Addiction in this light is the shadow speaking through action. It's your soul saying, if you won't listen to my grief, I will scream it through destruction. If you won't acknowledge my pain, I will make it impossible to ignore. The bottle becomes the voice of your unexpressed rage. The needle becomes the outlet for your forbidden vulnerability. The endless scrolling becomes the manifestation of your desperate need for connection that you've been too ashamed to admit. But here's what Jung understood that modern psychology refuses to face. The shadow is not evil. It's honest. It's the part of you that still feels even when the rest of you has gone numb. It doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be heard. It wants to be brought back into the circle of your conscious awareness so you can finally stop living as a fragment of who you truly are. The enemy is not outside of you. The enemy is the split self. You've divided yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts, and the unacceptable parts are staging a rebellion through your addiction. They're not trying to kill you, they're trying to save you from a life of psychological imprisonment. Until you stop demonizing your shadow and start listening to its message, you will never be free. You'll keep believing the war is against substances when the real war is against your own fragmentation. You'll keep thinking recovery means eliminating the dark parts of yourself when recovery actually means integrating them. The addict who faces their shadow doesn't become perfect, they become whole. They stop fighting parts of themselves and start understanding what those parts have been trying to communicate. The anger wasn't meaningless, it was protecting something valuable. The shame wasn't just destructive, it was highlighting where healing needed to happen. The grief wasn't weakness, it was love with nowhere to go. Jung said, what you resist persists. The parts of yourself you're trying to destroy through abstinence and willpower are the very parts that need your compassion and integration. The moment you turn toward your shadow with curiosity instead of condemnation, you begin the sacred process of becoming undivided. They call it rock bottom like it's a failure, but Jung would tell you that rock bottom is the most sacred place you'll ever reach. It's not where your life ends, it's where your mask finally shatters. It's where all the roles you've been performing, all the identities you've been wearing, collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. And while that collapse feels like death, it's actually initiation. You've heard this phrase 1,000 times, but nobody explains what it really means. Rock bottom is not about losing everything external. It's about the moment when nothing external can save you anymore. No distraction works. No one believes your excuses. No amount of performance can maintain the illusion. In that brutal, stripped-down moment, something ancient awakens inside you. Not your ego, not your trained responses, but your authentic self, the part that never left, the part that remembers what you are and what you came here to do. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, and every culture throughout history has recognized it as necessary for transformation. The hero's journey always includes a descent into chaos before rebirth. What's dangerous is not reaching rock bottom. What's dangerous is hovering above it for years, numb and functional but never truly falling and never truly changing. Rock bottom forces a choice that cannot be avoided: evolve or perish, not physically but spiritually. Do you continue the lie, or do you finally surrender to reality? That surrender isn't to a god, a program, or an external authority. It's surrender to truth itself. And truth is brutal, but it's also the only foundation strong enough to build a new life on. Everything else, every excuse, every half measure, every comfortable deception, eventually crumbles. This is why Jung believed in the necessity of symbolic death, the death of the addict's false identity so the real self can emerge. When you hit rock bottom, the person you thought you were dies. The strong one who had it all together dies. The victim who blamed everyone else dies. The performer who lived for applause dies. And in that death, space is created for who you actually are to finally breathe. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this descent. They medicate themselves with work, relationships, achievements, distractions, anything to avoid the terrifying moment of complete surrender. But the addict who reaches rock bottom has been given a gift that others will never receive: the gift of having nowhere left to hide. In that raw exposure, when every defense has failed and every mask has cracked, you meet yourself for the first time. Not the version you've been performing, not the image you've been maintaining, but the irreducible core that no substance can touch and no circumstance can destroy. This is what Jung meant by the self with a capital S, the eternal aspect of who you are that was never actually in danger. Rock bottom is misunderstood because we live in a culture that worships surfaces and fears depths. But Jung knew that transformation only happens in the depths. The surface self, the ego, will never voluntarily surrender its control. It has to be broken, shattered, forced to let go. And addiction, paradoxically, becomes the vehicle for that necessary breaking. The addict who embraces rock bottom as initiation rather than failure discovers something profound. They were never as fragile as they thought, and they were never as separate from their source as they believed. The bottom they hit is not empty space, it's solid ground. It's the foundation of truth that was always there, waiting to be discovered beneath all the layers of deception. Here's what every addiction treatment program won't tell you: the real work is not quitting. The real work is asking why you needed this in the first place. And what has your soul been trying to tell you that you've refused to hear? Jung said, "The gold is in the shadow," which means the parts of yourself you've been trying to kill don't need to die. They need to be understood, integrated, and transformed into allies rather than enemies. Most addicts have spent their lives trying to amputate pieces of themselves. The rage, the shame, the grief, the wild creativity, the unacceptable desires, believing that if they could just cut those parts out, they'd finally be free. But Jung knew better. Those rejected parts don't disappear when you try to eliminate them. They scream through cravings. They bleed through relapses. They sabotage every step forward until they are finally acknowledged and welcomed back into the circle of your conscious awareness. Integration doesn't mean becoming good. It means becoming whole. Your anger has a message that needs to be heard. Your shame carries truth about what matters to you. Your grief is love with nowhere to go. Your wildness contains the very creativity and authenticity that a sterile world tried to squeeze out of you. These aren't diseases to be cured. They're lost parts of your soul crying out for reunion. The shadow holds not just darkness but potential. When you begin to face your disowned aspects with honesty instead of judgment, something miraculous happens. You don't just get sober, you get reborn. You stop identifying as the broken addict and begin to identify as the one who survived, who endured, who stared into the abyss and lived to integrate the truth of what you found there. This is not about avoiding temptation forever. This is about becoming someone who no longer needs it. When you reclaim the parts of yourself that were once exiled, you become undivided. The craving loses its power because you're no longer fragmented. You're no longer at war with yourself. The energy that once went into internal conflict now becomes available for creation, for love, for authentic living. Jung understood that healing begins when the psyche finds a symbol, not a motivational quote, but a living image that reorders your entire sense of self. This happens in great myths, ancient rituals, and genuine spiritual awakenings. The addict doesn't just stop using, they become someone else entirely. Not by force, but by finally facing the parts of themselves they buried. What transforms you is not punishment or fear, but meaning. The day you realize your suffering has a purpose is the day your healing begins. Your addiction wasn't random. It was your psyche's attempt to self-medicate a spiritual wound that nobody else could see. When you understand this, everything changes. You stop seeing yourself as defective and start seeing yourself as someone who was searching for the sacred in all the wrong places. The symbol that heals you might come as a dream, a vision, a moment of clarity, or a story that suddenly makes sense of your chaos. Jung called these moments encounters with the self, not the ego self that performs and achieves, but the eternal self that connects you to something larger than your personal pain. When that connection is restored, the substance becomes irrelevant because you found what you were really looking for. True healing creates a new identity. You're no longer defined by what you've overcome, but by what you've become through the process of integration. The parts of yourself that once drove you to destruction now become sources of wisdom, creativity, and authentic power. The very intensity that made your addiction so consuming now serves your commitment to truth and wholeness. You are not your cravings. You are not your mistakes. You are not the shame that follows you or the guilt that haunts your nights. You are the one who watches, who suffers, who knows something has to change. And if you're willing to confront that knowing instead of numbing it, you will begin a journey most people never dare to take, the journey back to your center, to the unshakable core of who you actually are. Jung didn't believe in labeling people as addicts or lost causes. He believed in stories, in symbols, in the understanding that every addiction is a misunderstood myth waiting to be lived properly. The narrative you've been telling yourself, that you're broken, weak, diseased, is not the truth. It's a story imposed by a culture that profits from your fragmentation and doesn't want you to discover your actual power. The person beneath the addiction isn't defective. They're disoriented. They've forgotten how to hear their own voice. And in that silence, the craving speaks louder than truth. But when the true self begins to re-emerge even as a whisper, the grip of addiction starts to weaken. Not because the substance lost its power, but because the person remembered their own. To call someone an addict is to reduce their entire identity to a behavior. That's exactly what Jung resisted. He saw souls in exile, searching for their way back home to themselves. The craving isn't your identity. It's a signal that you've lost connection to something essential. The shame isn't who you are, it's evidence that you've been living beneath your truth. You are not the person who needs to escape anymore. That version of you was created by circumstances that convinced you that your authentic self was unacceptable. But what if it never was? What if the very qualities you learned to suppress, your intensity, your sensitivity, your refusal to accept mediocrity, are exactly what the world needs from you? When you reclaim your voice, something dangerous happens. You stop being manipulated by fear. You stop apologizing for your clarity. You stop performing for love. Because once you've tasted authentic self-expression, nothing fake can satisfy you again. Not even your addiction. The counterfeit loses its appeal when you've touched the real thing. Jung's message was revolutionary. If you're willing to turn inward, if you're willing to face your shadow, if you're willing to find your own meaning rather than accepting the meaning others have prescribed for you, then the substance will lose its grip. Not through willpower or discipline, but through recognition. You'll finally remember who you are beneath all the layers of conditioning and trauma. And who you are doesn't need to escape. Who you are is the escape from a life half-lived, from relationships based on performance, from the exhausting work of being someone else. The journey out of addiction is not a return to who you were before. It's a rebirth into someone you've never met but have always been becoming. Freedom isn't about being untouchable by temptation. It's about no longer being defined by what tempts you. The recovered addict doesn't chase perfection, they chase presence. They no longer run from silence, they sit with it. They no longer seek euphoria in substances, they find meaning in the mundane. They stop looking for the world to save them and begin building a life that doesn't require escape. This isn't a motivational ending wrapped in false hope. This is a mythic recognition of what you actually are, not a victim of circumstances, but the author of your response to them. Not broken and in need of fixing, but whole and in need of remembering. The gold was always there, buried beneath the shame and the stories. Jung simply showed you where to dig.